Welcome to the Never Board of Trade podcast. I think we're on episode 5 now. It feels like that's an official streak.
Yeah,
I think,
no,
right?
I think
At some
so.
point, we get. Actually, what I'm trying to figure out is at what point do we stop numbering them, and do we come up with like a naming convention or something else?
Episode 37.
Okay, is that the number? Okay,
yeah, sure. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
All right, perfect. So in about 7 months, if we get to that point,
there you go.
then we'll switch over to a different nomenclature.
I like that.
All right. So exciting couple of weeks since we last did one of these conversations.
Yeah.
We had an election.
Yes.
And it was a pretty boring one. Nothing really happened.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Same old.
So
I'm sure people can tell. Like, I am exhausted.
I am still so tired.
We're still recovering, but we're gonna power through this. So,
and it's worth noting, this is not the next day. This is Thursday. This is like 2-3 sleeps later, and I'm still exhausted trying to recover from this. And it's not just the election. I think it's worth noting because my words of admiration. Last podcast we were quite effusive in our praise of the Y Media folks for helping us do the debates and the coordination and the questions. Now I'm going to be effusive in my praise of their stamina.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how people do TV like this the way we did. Because I'm exhausted enough with the time, the mental energy.
Yeah, and they had a post-election show as well. So they not only stayed up till like 6 a.m, they had to, go back to the office for the post-election show. It's insane.
Yeah,
It's
my voice is still raw. I can hear your voice is a little off.
Yeah.
This is gonna be an interesting podcast
today. It is. Yeah.
the
the truth serum is going to come out. Yeah.
So, what did we think we learned on Monday night? We were both on TV for extended hours.
Yeah.
We did the initial elections coming in show.
Yeah.
And then as results were coming in, we were on panels with a bunch of different people from the community, people from different party stripes as well.
Yeah.
There were call-ins, there was all sorts of stuff. So I think we got an opportunity to see a lot of different perspective and share ideas with a lot of people. You've had a couple of days for it to stew in your brain now.
Yeah.
Any big observations, any big takeaways from election 2025?
Oh, man. There's so many angles to this, and this will be an election that I think we'll be talking about for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think, in many ways, so let's talk about the results. So it's a minority government, liberal government. It is a very strong minority government. They just need, 3 seats?
Yeah.
3 votes to be able to sort of keep the confidence of Parliament. And it's interesting because we were talking about, they kind of have their pick of the litter. They can get some votes from the NDP, from the Bloc, maybe even the Conservatives. Yeah. It's a very interesting kind of government to analyze. So in that way, I think it's very interesting. In terms of the results in Brampton, I personally was surprised with how razor thin the margins were. Brampton Centre wasn't called until 12 hours after the fact?
It was midday Tuesday before we felt comfortable putting out anything, even congratulating candidates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was wild to me. No longer Minister Kamal Khera lost her seat in Brampton West, which I don't think anyone saw that coming. I think she was one of the only, if not the only, active cabinet minister to lose her seat. So that was interesting. But congratulations to Amarjeet Gill. And then the usual suspects in the other ridings. So we have a mixed caucus from Brampton that we'll have to engage with in terms of our policy work. So that's interesting. But my brain goes everywhere. I mean, you had Pierre Poilievre losing a seat. You had Jagmeet Singh losing a seat. You had just this you had liberal strongholds that went conservative. You had NDP Matthew Green in Hamilton Centre was placed third in that riding. Brian Mass in Windsor as well. It was such an interesting election. I don't even know where to start, but I'm interested in a few things. I think the context heading into the election was very much a sort of a change versus Trump election. You had a contingent of the electorate who wanted change, and clearly the conservative messaging resonated with, in particular, young people, which we got to talk about there. But then you had sort of the specter of Trump kind of leading to a lot of liberal support. So what's your take on this election? Yeah.
I mean, all the things you just said, and a few more. I think it was fascinating to see. I think it was really interesting. A couple things, I guess. There's the meta election analysis piece that you've already touched on, and where do we go from here, and what does this mean? how can government function? I do think what's interesting right now that's different from minorities that we've seen of recent note is not only is it a strong minority, to your point, unlike like the last time we were in an environment like this, with the government sort of really coming in. I don't even think of the Trudeau government this way, because they were sort of on a decline. I think more about the Harper years, where is this an opportunity? Is this a minority that grows to a majority? That's a trajectory I'm interested in looking at. And when you look at what's in common and what's different, the difference now from that time is the minority is a little bit stronger, to your point, purely from a seats perspective. But there's also the existential crisis that led to this election still hasn't gone away. And will that lead to more collaboration and compromise and more just collaboration between I maybe said collaboration twice there, but just more cooperation? That was what I was looking for between the parties as a result. I'm quite curious. Typically, when you see a minority government, that party that is on the outside looking in, the official opposition, it can be quite undermining, because they're trying to trigger oftentimes another election with the hopes that results in them having an opportunity, and just waiting for the one misstep by the Prime Minister. But I think given the results of this current election, first off, the NDP was gutted. And so I think they're very incentivized to support the Liberal government, because they don't have the infrastructure to run another election. They have no money. They have no resources. They have no leader. So the idea that this government is unstable, I think, is a bit of a misconception. I think they're actually going to be quite stable. And the NDP are being quite incentivized to work with the Liberal government right now. So it's a virtual majority anyway, because the NDP can't afford to go back to the polls. And I think hopefully, but it'd be curious to me if this looming threat of the U.S. relationship, trade talks, sovereignty, because it hasn't really gone away, because we didn't get a clear answer as to what the Canadian electorate wanted. I think that, to me, is the biggest takeaway of how the voting broke. Is and Brampton's a case study in that. Narrow margins means there wasn't one real point of view that emerged. Is it about tariffs? Is it about affordability? It kind of feels like it's still about both. And for all those reasons, I feel like both parties are still going to have a lot of reason to work together to resolve issues. So I'm very optimistic at this point that this might actually result in something good over time for Canadians. For sure.
And one thing I will say, a few things, Pierre Poilievre conceded the election in a very sort of dignified way, and there were no riots after the fact. There was no stealing the election.
I thought it was great that there was at no point did he engage in any of the stuff that we see in the South, where the outcome of the election was debated. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no,
I thought it was so important, and I was really curious to see, would he in any way challenge the integrity of the result? He did not. And I think
absolutely not.
I do not like a lot of what Pierre Poilievre stands for. I very much appreciate that he took the loss and at no time challenged the result of the election, because I think had he done that, that could have been really, really traumatic for the country.
Totally. And I know listeners are probably listening in and thinking, the bar is absolutely in hell, that there are no riots after election. But I think, considering the political sort of and social and all of the contexts that our democracies around the world are in, I think it is actually something to note and to be happy about. But I agree with you about the nature of this government. I think it will be stable for a while. It's interesting because the next scheduled election will be in 2029. It's interesting whether or not the government lasts until then. I think is an interesting question. If it falls in, say, 2028 or before, Trump will continue to be president. So that'll be an interesting context, right? Does this outlast Trump, or does it still kind of operate in the Trump sort of reality? So that's interesting. I think you brought up this point as well. I'm curious if over the next little bit, the Liberals are going to lobby for some crossing of the floor to happen. Maybe in the end, because they can shop around, and the NDP, they don't have official party status anyway. So whether they have 7 or 4 or whatever it is,
it doesn't change the reality of the NDP as a party.
Exactly. And I wonder to what extent, the NDP will want to shore up support over a longer period of time. And they might, in fact, they do have leverage for sure, but they might they might, make the decision to, we actually need a stable government because we need time to rebuild.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think they definitely have some leverage.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to be. I don't think they're going to be very motivated to use that leverage for the time being, because what happens if the NDP hypothetically helps a non-confidence vote come through, and we go back to the polls in a year.
Yeah,
I think the NDP just becomes further marginalized as a result. They don't, and it's terrible that this is what it comes down to, because you want politics in our country to be around discourse and exchange of ideas and vision, but fundamentally it always comes back to money. They do not have the money to run another election. They barely, it seemed, to have the money to run this current election. Those candidates were largely invisible, and I think that was a large reason why they had the result that they did. Not only did the key issues of the election become ones that the NDP didn't have strong answers for, particularly on the tariff piece. More importantly, I think they just didn't have the resources to run effective campaigns against the other two parties. And so for all those reasons, I think you're going to have stability for some time. But I do believe if you're in the Liberal Party machine right now, you're having, there's a list somewhere in Liberal Party headquarters of, which NDP MPs do we think we can entice to come over? And I don't think it's going to take a lot necessarily for some, because if you're right now an elected MP without official party status, you don't have you're not getting funding. You barely have a budget for staff. It's not a given that you're going to have speaking time. It's not a given that you're going to be on a committee. You're basically serving now at the generosity of the governing party, which is the Liberal Party, who's going to have to invite you into things. So as a result of that, if you're an MP representing the NDP, if you have really strong philosophical beliefs in the NDP's platform and philosophy, you may choose to hold steadfast. But I could see for folks who may look at the practicality of it to say, I can continue to represent this particular party, or I can switch over to this other party and maybe be more effective in representing my community, because I'll have a voice, because I'll have the opportunity to serve on committee, because perhaps I'll have the opportunity to get staffing and get research and do things that I set out to do when I made the promise to my community to represent them. And I suspect that there are some folks doing some calculus right now to figure out, can I be the best MP? Can I be the best representative of my community by staying an NDP, or moving to the Liberal Party, or maybe even the Conservative Party? And I wouldn't be surprised if over time we start to see some migration. I wouldn't be shocked if a year from now we do have a Liberal majority, not because of an election, but because of just transition.
Fascinating. Well, let's see how that plays out.
Stuff, like lots of weird stuff that could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I left
when we left the studio at Y Media. I was going to say Monday night, I guess Tuesday morning. We went till 3 a.m. recording. And even then, we were prepared to do longer. I think the consensus was Elections Canada stopped because we just didn't see the polls changing. When I left, I was really disappointed that we didn't get a majority, because I thought that was going to be vital to move the country forward, that we needed a clear mandate, that we needed a strong prime minister with a mandate for negotiations with Trump, and for a whole bunch of reasons. And quite frankly, to help unify the country again, because this was an election, and the lead up to the election, that was quite divisive. And we can talk a little bit more about sort of the demographic lines on which this election was determined. So I left really disappointed that we didn't have a majority government. And that was sort of my point of view going in. I almost didn't care who won, so long as we had a majority, because I felt that was the more important thing. In the days that have passed, and I've reflected a little bit more on this and thought about what are the ramifications, and to your point, it being a strong minority, not a weak minority, I actually think we've got a really good outcome, because I think it will force, and again, I might be a little naive here, I think it will force real compromise and collaboration, and it'll force, I think, parties to not ram through their vision, but have to work with Canadians to bring people back toward a singular vision. The fact that it was almost an even split as to which of those two visions of Canada people wanted will force the Liberal government to have to be a little more inclusive of other points of view and a little more expansive about the issues that they take on. So in the long run, this could be a great thing for us.
That's a great perspective. I'm quite optimistic about the results as well. And I will say, again, like, I didn't expect to be praising Pierre Poilievre this much today, but he did say, he said, we're prepared to work with Prime Minister Carney to face this challenge of Trump. And I think that's an important message that this is not the time for hyper partisanship that we need to. I think in many ways this is the best result we could have asked for, because I think maybe a majority might have left no incentive for that collaboration. But before we move on from the NDP, I do want to take a moment to recognize Jagmeet Singh as well. He did a lot of his Bramptonian, exactly. He did a lot of his political career in Brampton. It's interesting because I used to, when I was a lot younger in 2011, I volunteered for his first federal campaign, and then he transitioned into provincial politics. But at that time in 2011, the idea of a turban-sick candidate running for the NDP was actually kind of like, shouldn't you be running for the Liberals? Like that was that was the idea. But he really did. I would say he meant a lot. Obviously, the South Asians, and Bramptonians, and Punjabi Sikh individuals. But he also, I think, he kind of led a lot of us to a sort of political awakening, an awareness of social justice, and all of those things. And thinking about the last 15 years, I think he represented something that was net positive for Canada, and I think there's been a lot that it's unfortunate that his what people remember about him is sort of this losing his seat, losing 17 seats, whatnot. But I think history will be kind to him. I think he sacrificed a lot to in his case prevent a supermajority for the Conservatives. He could have called an election earlier, but he also, was instrumental, and his caucus was instrumental in pushing pharmacare and dental care as well. So I think, I think history will be kind to him, and I think all in all, his political legacy is an important one.
I think so. I think he we all can be prisoners of the moment, and so it's easy at this time to be a little bit cynical about. Whether or not he should have called the election earlier, or not called it, but forced the election earlier. What his motivations were for not doing so. But in the main, I agree with you. Like, we have to look at these things with a historical perspective. He managed to move forward. And you can say politically, he did not do well. He lost seats. Like ultimately, the job of a party leader is to
get seats.
Get seats. That's ultimately it's to raise money, get seats, increase influence, and win. And on that level, I think he did not do well. And not just this election. He was on a slide for several years here. And in that way, I think as a party leader, his marks overall, might not be the best. But the other part of representing a community and being a party leader is to move policy initiatives forward and advance the priorities for which you were elected. And in that regard, I think he well outshone some of his predecessors. So when we compare him to a Mulcair or others who did he achieve as much for the NDP as a politician, as a party leader? I think no. But his predecessors were not nearly as successful as he was in getting the policy initiatives of the NDP adopted by their parties. And among the things that you've seen with the NDP, I have affiliations with Greens. There's also sort of like a moral victory we look for well, we didn't win, but we know we influenced the thinking of, and this is very much a Green sort of piece, right? Like Elizabeth May will never be Prime Minister of Canada, but through her dogged efforts and the efforts of Green candidates across the country, issues of the environment and sustainability, are now being talked about. That's the kind of thing that we look for. I think in Jagmeet's case, it goes well beyond moral victory. He got legislation passed by a Liberal government that is enshrining things like access to pharmacare. Expansion of pharmacare and access to dental care in a way that I don't think would have been priorities for that government without him using what leverage he had and using the platform he had to advance that. And I think so in some cases, I think he didn't he didn't fulfill all the requirements of his job. But I think as we look back, he achieved more than I think those who may have been more politically successful than him. And I think in history he will be seen as a figure that was of note. And I think absolutely, as someone who's like from the Punjabi Sikh community, what he represents to our community is like, I don't think you can calculate that. And I don't know how many people, young people, we won't know for some time how many young people he inspired to get into politics,
Yeah.
who inspired to have a moral voice and a compassionate voice, and to, be cynical or not. I choose not to be. To make empathy a key part of your campaign platform, and not leave that, and stay true to his social justice roots. I think is remarkable. I'm really proud of what he achieved. And you talked about those early campaigns, working on them. We at the Board of Trade, do debates. That's one of our functions in government here. We hosted the first debates, coordinated, moderated the first debates that he was part of here in our community. And so to see someone, start out, and you got to see it from one perspective, I got to see it from the other. I moderated those first debates he did. To see that person to where he is now it's a remarkable journey, and it's an amazing thing to be front seat to. I'm really proud of what someone from our community was able to do. Yeah,
it's incredible, truly incredible. All right, so that's the NDP. Let's move on to the Conservatives for a moment. You mentioned, the election was kind of split on demographic lines to a certain degree. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see, in full what the actual results are. There's going to be a lot of conversation, I'm sure. There's more polling and research done. But from what we understand heading in, from what all the advanced polling told us, or sort of the immediate exit polling told us, is that the vote that the Conservative Party carried, which focused on issues around affordability, focused on issues like safety and security, focused on issues like managing or limiting immigration in this country, resonated with a particular audience. And that particular audience was predominantly a younger audience, predominantly a male audience, and was not an audience or a demographic that showed up for the Liberal Party. And conversely, the Liberal Party that ran on the issue of tariffs and Canadian sovereignty, was really represented and carried by a demographic that was a little broader from a gender perspective, but demographically, age-wise, was an older demographic. And so we had two competing visions for what this election was about. Two competing visions for what needs to be improved in Canada, but was also adopted by two very different groups of people. And in order to move things forward, whatever party's governing is going to have to find a way to represent a broader swath of Canadians. And I think that really played out in a place like Brampton, where we saw the issues that were being raised by the Liberal candidates during debates, and the issues that were being raised by the Conservative candidates in debates were very seldom the same issue. If we asked a question, they both answered the same question. But if they were left to raise their, like when they did their openings or their closings or had their opportunity to speak extemporaneously, they almost never talked about the same stuff. The Conservative candidates always wanted to talk about issues like crime, safety and security, the challenges with how immigration has contributed to those particular issues, and really the kitchen table issues of affordability, groceries, things of that nature. And it felt like the Liberal Party candidates were talking about completely different issues. Affordability came up, but they talked about it in different ways. And they really tried to place the challenge around tariffs and the current economic conditions, not the preceding historical factors that have led to this, nothing upstream.
Absolutely.
And I think that's it's an opportunity, I think, for organizations like us to make sure that all these issues are being raised and they're not being forgotten. I think that's why we're lucky to have a mixed caucus here, actually, because we will have political representation on both sides, where hopefully we can build some consensus. But I think, it really sent the message back to hopefully being heard in Ottawa that, no party had the right vision. You both had elements of it. You both found people who agreed with you, but you weren't able to appeal to the broad Canadian audience, either group. And whoever's going to govern, if they want to govern for the extended period of time, is going to have to craft a newer vision than the one that this election was contested on. And I think everyone's going to have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, how do we create a more inclusive a set of priorities for Canadians?
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think it's interesting because I'd be interested to know, so we understand that the 18 to 35, 18 to 40 roughly demographic leaned conservative. Civics, which is a civil society organization that they run the student vote initiative. They ran a mock election for 900,000 young people.
It's a small sample size.
Yeah, exactly. Not quite a voting age yet, and they elected a conservative minority government. I think that's very interesting. The conservative messaging resonated with young people. And I think that's part of Brampton's story as well. Brampton is one of the youngest cities in the country. And I think that's one of the reasons why we saw, razor thin margins, because we were sort of, there were two messages, right? To your point. What I find interesting, so what I would be interested in is any data that suggests the vote breakdown, that illustrates the vote breakdown, obviously based on age, but also based on home ownership versus, you live with your parents or you're renting or something like that. I think that would be interesting. That would tell a certain story about what sort of this new class war in Canada actually looks like, and sort of illustrate what the competing vision actually is. But what's also interesting is we saw in this election, maybe just up until the writ was issued for this election, the Conservatives had so much money and they were investing heavily in ad campaigns and in particular digital campaigns. And that, of course, has a younger audience as well. So it's very interesting because, Pierre losing his seat, maybe it's a referendum on his leadership, but the Conservatives, for all intents and purposes, did perhaps the best that they've ever done in any election ever. They had incredible vote efficiency in this election. They gained like a ton of seats. I don't know how many, but a bunch. And they were really giving the Liberals a run for their money for a good chunk of that night.
I think the statistic I saw was this is the best election result for the Conservatives since 1988.
There you go.
Since Mulrooney years.
There you go.
So this is how far back it goes.
There you go.
So tremendous support for that, which comes back to this idea. But Poilievre himself didn't win his own riding. So is this a question of we like the message but not the messenger? Were there other factors that play more locally with him?
I feel like the Freedom Convoy stuff maybe had a part to play in Ottawa specifically.
Absolutely. Like he ran in an Ottawa adjacent riding for sure, and I think there's some spillover there. I'm really curious to see what the party decides their future is with him. He's saying all the right things now, and he's definitely in his concession speech on Monday night indicated he has a commitment to still running, still being involved. I am curious, however, and this is where I think we need to see some of that post-election data. Is how close were those vote splits overall across the country? They got some breakthroughs in Ontario that they didn't that they wouldn't normally have had. Places like in Brampton, they were really close to breaking through as well, but didn't quite get there. Do they feel that they've got the right message for Ontario and Central Canada, or do they need to find someone who has a broader appeal in this part of the country? I think will be part of the leadership assessment they need to do.
Totally.
Are Canadians just tired of Pierre Poilievre? He was really effective because of the reasons you described. They spent like crazy on digital campaigns, social media. He was everywhere. And he's really effective at as a messenger. I think he's actually that's his strength more than as a parliamentarian or a policy guy. He positions himself as that, but really what he is he's an incredibly effective communicator. And but all communicators, all messages eventually have a shelf life. If that's your strength, at some point, people get tired of hearing your voice. People are probably tired of hearing my voice right now. and that party may go back and say, look, we appreciate what you've done. He's brought in a ton of money to that party. He's brought in that demographic of young men. But how loyal are they to him? Or are they loyal to the party now? And is it time for a new voice? I'm really curious what kinds of conversations are happening among the Conservative Party right now to determine where they go from here. I can see a case be made to keep him. I can see a case be made to say it's time for something new.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting because I feel like, we've talked about this and we don't need to sort of rehash what we talked about on air for Y Media, but there are sort of two paths. You either stay the course because clearly something is working, or you kind of go the Doug Ford, Red Tory, Patrick Brown route, and you try to appeal to Ontario even more so. So anyway, that's interesting.
So locally, what do you think? So we talked about sort of the big picture stuff, and there's going to be lots of fun stuff to talk about as these machinations play out at the party headquarters over the years, over the months to come. Locally, we had some interesting results. So we've talked about how close the splits were. We had one riding flip from Liberal to Conservative. We had the new riding of that where there was no incumbent in Brampton Centre was one of the closest ridings in the country. Came down to basically I think it was like 120 votes in the end, like a nothing. That determined that. What do we make of that? What do we do with that as a board of trade? Like, what does that mean for you and I? What does it mean for our organization?
Well, it's interesting because first of all, if there's any doubt whether our vote matters, I think that doubt should disappear.
100%. This was the election that proved every vote matters.
Exactly. But it's an interesting situation because we have to. I think we have some relationships with some of our four of the MPs. Yeah. Amandeep Sodhi is new. She's 23 years old, very young.
New in every way.
In every way. And Amarjeet Gill is maybe not new to politics, but newly elected, and he is a conservative in a sea of red.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how this sort of diverse caucus kind of plays out in terms of some of the dynamics with respect to some of our key issues.
Yeah.
For example, we didn't have the chance to welcome Amarjeet Gill in our debates, but we did ask every candidate to sign a pledge for the LRT. I'd be curious to know where Mr. Gill stands on that issue in particular. He ran against Kamal Khera, the Minister of Health.
Yeah.
What are his positions on healthcare and increasing funding? We have acute health challenges here, healthcare challenges here. And then, of course, the immigration file as well. He does not belong to the governing caucus, let's call it. What is his position on immigration and all these important issues, and how can he work with the rest of the Brampton caucus, which isn't of the same political stripe as him?
Yeah.
How can that play out from an advocacy standpoint? So, what's your take on that?
Similarly, I'm curious to see, again, is there a more Ottawa-based, what is their strategy to ensure that conservative candidates in situations like this have the opportunity to adjust their messaging to like, do they look to double down on what got him elected, or do they start to shift slightly more to the left in order to become more collaborative and be able to shape policy? Like that to me is almost like a strategic question that will come from Ottawa that I'm curious to see what happens. I think that'll be the tenor of what this current term of government looks like and that's really analyzing the results of the election, right? Do the Conservatives believe it's better to stick to their what they think got them elected and be even more outspoken on those issues? Or are they looking to find ways to work more closely with the Liberal government in order to advance policy initiatives? I'm curious to see, because I think that's outside of our community. How that strategy plays out on both sides, quite frankly, would be quite interesting. I think that'll shape what happens here. But as a Board of Trade and from as members and representatives of our community, I agree with you. Like it's really saying, okay, we have set some policy priorities that we brought into this election. We talked to the candidates who made themselves available about those. And you indicated Mr. Gill was not part of the debates, but not every Liberal who was elected was part of our debate process either. That's right. And so I think our work is getting some clear alignment on what the issues are in Brampton, communicated back to those candidates, and ideally building some consensus, regardless of their political affiliation, that these are the issues that matter. And that's what I'm curious to see how we can, because as I shared, and I think you share a similar perspective, they were elected on very different platforms. This wasn't a we agree these are the issues, but there's some slight variation on the policy. Like it wasn't like we all agree on the what, but we're in disagreement about the how. There was fundamental disagreement on the what. And so how we can get now, admittedly, it's 5-1. It may not be a huge struggle, but getting consensus on what those priorities are would be really interesting to me. And if we can get that to happen, But the question I have for you on that note then is, we went into the election with an idea of what we felt those priorities were, and the top of the list for us were affordability, as it pertained to housing in particular, and immigration, and how immigration reform. What the immigration reform could look like. And there were some other issues to be sure. And then, continuation of, funding for infrastructure projects, specifically the LRT. We've gone through the process now. We've seen what the electorate responded to in terms of their votes and in terms of what they went to the polls for. Do we feel any different about what our priorities need to be? Because I will say this much for me. We didn't look at the issue of safety and security in a big way. And I think in part because it doesn't necessarily overlap as a business issue. It's not one that our membership brought forward. But it strikes me as very clear that the community responded to that issue when those Conservative candidates brought it forward. Not only did Gill win, one of the candidates who came really close as well was Sukhdeep Kang, who ran in Brampton West. Brampton
South.
South. Yeah. Thank you. My apologies. Brampton South. And she almost defeated Sonia Sidhu, who, again, long-standing member of the Liberal Party, very established in the community, big fundraiser for the party. Like, this is a candidate who should have won easily.
Decisively.
And it came down to the wire, and Kang ran on a message of, leaned on her background as in law enforcement and talked about safety and security issues as being the crux. That was the narrative she had. And she did a really effective job of telling stories of people that she had personally interacted with and how crime had affected them in this community. And I'm just left, I'm not saying we change. I'm just in my head, I'm like, do we think about this enough? Do we have the pulse of what's going on as closely as we should? Do we need to think a little bit differently about the policy initiatives that we bring forward and what we advocate for? Should we be thinking more about safety and security? I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, and
like, what have you learned from this that's making you, or are you at all rethinking what our priorities are based on what we've learned from this election?
Honestly, maybe there is a space for more safety and security conversations and crime and all of that. Maybe this is my own bias, but I think, I was surprised with how much that issue resonated with voters. Yeah. Clearly. In my mind, I would think of that more as a provincial conversation. Yep. But I think you made this point before. In elections, I mean, all of these issues it doesn't matter about jurisdiction. It's sort of like,
this is the stuff that people care about.
Exactly. And so, maybe that is part of it. And I think at the Board of Trade, we've always taken this perspective of, community issues are business issues because businesses are in the community, right? Yeah. So I do think there is an opportunity for that. I will say maybe the issues that I wouldn't say surprised me, but I think I think a lot of these ridings kind of came down to the 2-horse race, right? And really, this was, I think, for some people, a decision about who do we want as prime minister, and I think that the effect of that was a lot stronger than I had anticipated. And to me, I guess it's less of a policy issue kind of perspective, but is there a local engagement, civic literacy, a sort of defense of local representatives piece that maybe we could play in future elections for folks and really say, well, no, this is how maybe this is how you can be an effective MP or MPP for your riding. Almost like a handbook to the candidates themselves. That say, this is what we want you to advance in Parliament. If you get a question period, if you have a private member's bill, whatever it is, these are tangible ways you can represent your community. Maybe that's sort of that's sort of the thinking that I've been having in the last few days. Yeah. But I'll be honest with you, in terms of all the other policy issues with respect to affordability and all of that, I think this conversation or this election was really about do you resonate with the tariff conversation or do you resonate with the affordability conversation? Yeah. What I would have liked to see more of is the public transit conversation.
Sure.
Right? And the LRT, we had this massive announcement 2 days before the election was called, and it felt like the LRT was just missing in the Brampton conversation about this election. But anyway.
And I think, it just speaks to where our opportunities are, and I think some of the reflection we need to do, right? So was that missing because other issues were deemed more important? Was it missing because, to your point, this became an election about the party leader, not the local representation, and therefore there was just no space for local issues in the discourse, right? If the whole election is being framed about who's going to be the prime minister and who's going to best deal with Donald Trump, well, then the issue of a local LRT is not going to be on the radar. So that's a possibility. Yeah. But I'm always open. I always want to be self-reflective. Like, are we misreading it? Like, we believe in this transit project. Yeah. I do believe it has impact for our entire community. Yeah. But maybe we're not. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe we're reading it the wrong way. Yeah. Or perhaps there hasn't been an effective enough job done of explaining why this should be more of an issue.
Agreed.
Like, so I do think there's almost some going back to the drawing board for us even to say, are our priorities, in fact, the ones that are the most impactful for our community? Yeah. Yes or no? And if they are, but not perceived that way, could we be doing a better job of communicating why they should have that importance?
Yeah.
And I think there's some work for us potentially. I don't think we're doing anything wrong.
No, I agree.
I just think, when you step away, everyone should be reflective, not just those who are going through the election themselves, but those institutions like ourselves who want to have a voice in these elections. I think there's also an opportunity for us to be, or a requirement, quite frankly, an obligation to be self-reflective and say, were our policy priorities that we felt should be election issues, should be ballot issues, were they ballot issues? I feel like our issues did not become ballot issues, and I'm just not sure why yet. Was it because, to your point, it was a referendum on the prime minister? Was it because we didn't read it right? Was it because we didn't communicate them well? I think there's some opportunity for us to grow there. But either way, I think it all starts with this. It starts in the same place, which is engaging this new caucus that we've got, bringing those issues forward and starting to get them into some dialogue here. Because it may turn out that post-election, they are ready to roll up their sleeves and be more locally focused again. And that would be lovely.
Yeah.
And maybe we're past this point, this moment where it felt, I think you used the term when we were on TV the other night, like it felt like a presidential election.
Yeah.
Where we're really just talking about two people at the expense of all the local representation.
Totally.
If we're lucky, now that that's been resolved, maybe we get back to local representation in the conversation again.
Yeah.
But if we don't, then I think we know exactly what our job is then. We got to make this a local representation thing again.
Totally. And I also think we got to expand who we're talking to. I think we survey folks who are typically engaged citizens and active citizens, and they understand the importance of these local initiatives. Most people aren't that, right? Most people don't look at polling and they're surprised about a Mark Carney victory. And I know a bunch of people, just again anecdotally, but folks who aren't tapped into partisan politics, they expected a supermajority for the Conservatives, right? So it's there. Sometimes I think, I'm not saying we're in an echo chamber, but I do sometimes think there's a little bit of confirmation bias because we talk to like-minded folks. So.
So I think that's the next step for us. So coming up, we're going to be doing some outreach. We did some initial sort of just congratulations to folks. We're in the process of doing some outreach to all the candidates now, our new MPs, or newly elected MPs, or re-elected MPs. Yeah. And I think the next step for us now really is some formal engagement. Yeah. Both in one-to-ones. I think you and I should be doing some door knocking over the next week or two. Yeah. And then some kind of formal engagement with all six collectively for our membership. Yeah. And I think that's our opportunity now to sort of go back to drawing board and say, okay, are our issues still relevant issues? Is there anything we've learned? And really start to learn from those six what their commitment to the community is, what their priorities are, what direction they're getting from Ottawa. And start figuring out how we work with this group of individuals to move the community forward. And I don't think it's a given, even among those who we've worked with in the past, that the relationship will stay the same because the priorities may have changed. Yeah. And both locally and federally, like in Ottawa. So I think some really interesting conversations are going to happen in the next few weeks amongst us and them. And then hopefully very shortly amongst our membership and those elected officials as we've tried to figure out, okay, what's the path forward for Brampton?
We'll give it some time, but absolutely, this is exactly the goal, right? Sit down with our new caucus, Brampton caucus, and get to work. So absolutely. So before we wrap this up, I think we should probably mention some policy wins.
Okay, because we don't have to make more predictions, do we?
No. Over the past weekend, we were in Windsor for the Ontario Chamber of Commerce AGM. Part of this process with the OCC and the Canadian Chamber, the CCC, is they have this policy resolutions debate. We introduced two policy resolutions, one around addressing some of these challenges that we talk about all the time through a redirection of a portion of the land transfer tax to municipalities. And then the second was around strengthening our post-secondary sector and ensuring that both municipalities and the post-secondary sector are supported financially. Both passed. Yeah. There was some discussion around both of them, and they both passed. And how'd you feel about that process?
It was great. Well, it was the first time for you and I doing it. So I thought it was great that we got an opportunity to exercise that muscle, learn that process. Thank you for taking the lead on it, quite frankly, because you did a lot of the homework and the engagements to shape those policies and wrote the first draft of both those policies on our behalf. I think I liked engaging in the process, and for those who may be listening in, it's not simply just putting forward a proposal and getting the opportunity to speak to it. It goes through a vetting process among our peers from other chambers who may have subject matter expertise on the issue.
Yeah.
The OCC reviews as well, their policy team.
Yeah.
So by the time we got to Windsor to talk about these policies, it had gone through a few different filters.
And even before that, PGR as well.
Internally, yes, 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we bring some ideas forward. Our own Policy and Government Relations Committee reviews them, helps us shape them, and then we go through the filter of other boards of trade. So by the time we get to Windsor, wherever the AGM happens to be that year, it's gone through a process of review and commentary
Debates,
and evolution of the language to make sure that it feels broadly acceptable and represents enough of the communities that it could get passed. And then, to your point, we go up, we present it. It was part of a compendium of somewhere around 40, was it overall?
37, yeah.
37, there you go, of different issues. And I always love these policy review pieces, in part because it's just these fascinating insights into what matters in other communities.
Exactly.
Because there are initiatives that come forward that are just like pan-Ontario, or when we go to CCC, like pan-Canadian. It's like, of course, we should be doing this. And it's logical. And every community in the country shall benefit from this moving forward. And then there's these issues that come up as like, this is very specific to a very particular industry or to a very particular part of the country. And you'll see initiatives that come forward that are like very specifically to Northern Ontario, or very specifically to like Eastern Ontario, or the Ottawa region. Yeah. And I love these little insights and views you get into what matters in these communities that might be very different than what we go through here, because we don't have a sector that's involved in logging, or because there isn't like any mining that happens in Brampton.
Yes.
So long story short, I love that part of it.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy that you and I both got the opportunity to participate in it, and through extension, our Policy and Government Relations Committee got an opportunity to participate in this. Because to your point, we're speaking on behalf of the work that represents our whole membership.
Yep.
And it was great to get up there and have our ideas put forward. They're on the policy books now for the OCC for the next 3 years. Yes. Which is fantastic then. So what this means in theory is as they develop specific advocacy activities, initiatives around the topics that we put in resolutions on, our resolutions should be considered therefore as part of the thinking. Because it represents the broad membership of the OCC now.
Exactly.
So I'm really excited to see if any of our resolutions actually manifest into policy priorities of the OCC, and looking forward to gently nudging them along the way. We introduced one element on the university one, the colleges and university one in particular, around the heads and beds levy, which is a little bit technical, and not every community was initially behind it, in part because it actually benefits some cities more than others, hypothetically. And that's all about redirecting resources from the province towards the municipalities in which, in our case, students reside. The heads and beds levy applies to other institutions as well, but in our case specifically, to address where students reside, not necessarily where they're enrolled. And so that has an outsized benefit to a community like Brampton, which not only has a number of schools that attract students, but specifically, we have a lot of students who live in Brampton who attend school elsewhere because online education is a thing, because they may only be attending part-time, because they may be here for co-ops or other experiential learning pieces. So we have an outsized student body that's disproportionate to the number of students who are here for schools in Brampton. So consequently, our community carries a heavy financial cost in terms of transit and picking up garbage and all the other stuff that goes along with that, that we don't get the compensation for. So that was not benefiting every city individually, equally rather, but it definitely benefits Brampton. So I was really happy that got through. But in order to get it through, we had to soften the language a little bit. And so I'm really curious now, over the next couple of years, now that this is on the books, how can we continue to sort of work on this idea and continue to move it forward and maybe hone it into something that has some teeth? Or does it remain something that just is kind of soft, mushy language, which we needed to do to get it initially accepted? Or can we actually advance this into something that really becomes a policy priority for the OCC? So I think in some ways the work is just beginning.
Absolutely.
That which we started in Windsor this week.
And just to follow up on that too, we're going to be gently nudging the OCC, to your point. But also, as we do our advocacy work, I think it's really powerful for us when we're essentially making the case to an elected official, whoever else, a stakeholder of some sort. if we say, well, actually, this happens to be a priority of the Ontario Chamber as well, and this passed with 98% or whatever, that's also very powerful in our advocacy when we kind of advance these priorities as well. So just an illustration of the advocacy work that we do at the Board of Trade, and that their progress is progress, right? Yeah.
And how do you feel about it? Because I this was kind of like, I don't know if it was a bucket list. I don't know if it was like elevate to that size, but I know it was like one of those like on your to-do list when you took this job is you wanted to do a policy resolution and get it adopted and go through the process. How does it feel?
No, it feels great. It's great. It's a good process. I feel like I enjoyed the engagement from industry and a few other stakeholders who had genuine concerns about some of the language and the figures that we had put forward. It's a good process of give and take, and I enjoyed being a little bit stubborn on certain things, and I think it's good work, and I want to thank the OCC for making it a pretty seamless process as well. So.
And we get to do it all over again for this fall if we'd like. The Canadian Chamber has the same process in October, I think it is, October, November. So we get to do this all over again, and if we want, and see if we can find some policy priorities that we think our colleagues on a national level might want to get behind that are good for Brampton. I think that'll be really fun because what it'll do is give us the opportunity to talk to some boards across the country now, not just those in Ontario. We've talked about communities like Surrey, for instance, having some of the same demographic and business issues as we do. This might be an opportunity to build some fun bridges with other cities as we start to bring forward national policy initiatives coming out of Brampton.
And those debates are feisty. Like
way feistier. The regionality comes out. So way more fun.
So, and it's a good time because we just finished a federal election. If you have any ideas, for those listening, feel free to reach out to myself, Jaipaul Massey-Singh at BramptonBOT.com. And we can start to shape our national advocacy agenda as well. I mean, we do have priorities, but to your point, they will continue to be refined as the circumstances change. And then we can put forward a policy resolution too at CCC this fall.
And in the meantime, lots of engagement with our new MPs. We still have to do some engagement with our recent MPPs. So as we head through a really busy season of events and so forth at the Board of Trade, it's starting to come to an end over the next couple of weeks. What I'm looking forward to, particularly when summer recess starts to hit and those elected officials spend more time in the community, a lot of engagement with both our provincial and our new federal representatives as we really figure out what this election means. I think we'll know in the months to come.
Exciting.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right.
Cool.
So we'll do this again in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good.
All right. Let's wrap it up here for now, and we'll come back with some more updates soon.
All right.
All right.
Thanks for watching.